Evan Reed was the kind of man who preferred routines, the kind that made life predictable and manageable. That Thursday night, the rain had begun falling in soft, persistent sheets, tapping against the wide windows of his living room. The low hum of his laptop filled the room as he reviewed code for a client's website, the glow of the screen casting a pale light over his features. The house was quiet, his wife Clara away visiting her parents for the weekend, leaving him alone with the rhythmic patter of water on the roof. He liked these moments of solitude, the chance to exist solely on his own terms. A sudden knock at the door startled him, the sound loud and urgent against the backdrop of rainfall. Evan frowned, glance flicking toward the dark street outside. Visitors were rare at this hour, and certainly not expected in the middle of a storm. He rose slowly, tension gathering in his chest, and walked to the door. Through the small window, he saw a man, tall, dark-haired, drenched from the rain, holding a flashlight in one hand and a dripping umbrella in the other. "Hi," the man said, his voice edged with uncertainty but polite. "I'm Liam, your neighbor. Sorry to bother you so late, but my power just went out, and I was wondering if you could help me." Evan's initial apprehension softened. Liam's expression was open, not demanding, and there was something about his posture, slightly hunched from the wet, perhaps, but still poised, that suggested he wasn't just asking for a favor out of convenience. "Of course," Evan said, unlocking the door. "Come in before you catch a cold." The warm air of Evan's home met Liam as he stepped inside, the smell of rain and wet fabric mixing with the faint aroma of coffee Evan had left on the counter earlier. Liam shook off his umbrella, dripping water across the tiles, and Evan quickly fetched a towel. "Thanks," Liam said, dabbing at his hair. His dark eyes met Evan's, brief and direct, then flicked away with a small, almost apologetic smile. They moved to the living room, where Evan offered Liam a seat on the couch. "I can let you charge your phone here," Evan said. "The storm might knock the power out for a while." Liam nodded, a faint blush on his cheeks. I appreciate that. It's just, everything went dark all of a sudden. I couldn't do anything, my computer, the lights, everything." He laughed lightly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's embarrassing, honestly." Evan watched him for a moment, noticing the small details, the crease of his shirt damp from the rain, the way his hands fidgeted with the hem of his sleeve. There was a vulnerability in Liam that Evan recognized, a quiet honesty that drew him in despite himself. "You're new here, right?" Evan asked, trying to break the silence that had settled like a heavy curtain. Liam nodded. "Yeah. Just moved in a couple of weeks ago. It's a big change, you know. New city, new apartment, sometimes it feels like I don't really belong anywhere." Evan nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. Even when you've lived somewhere for a while, it can still feel like you're just passing through." There was a pause, the kind that stretches long enough to feel intimate without a word being spoken. The sound of rain filled the gaps, punctuating their silence, and Evan felt a subtle warmth spreading in his chest, a connection he hadn't anticipated. "You live here alone?" Liam asked quietly. "Yes," Evan replied. "Clara's visiting her parents. Just me tonight." He hesitated, unsure why he was sharing this, then added, "I usually like the quiet. Gives me time to think." Liam's gaze softened. "I know that feeling. I don't get much of that myself, lately." His voice dropped almost to a whisper, carrying a weight Evan didn't fully understand. Evan handed him a phone charger. "There you go. Should keep your phone alive until the power's back." Liam took it, their fingers brushing lightly. Evan noticed the fleeting contact and felt a small, inexplicable tension twist in his stomach. He quickly looked away, focusing instead on the storm outside. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, the hum of the laptop mixing with the rain. Liam's eyes occasionally flicked toward Evan, observing without intruding. Evan found himself responding with subtle nods, small gestures of acknowledgement, each one feeding the strange energy between them. "You're a good neighbor," Liam said finally, voice quiet, almost confessional. "I didn't expect anyone to." I don't know, actually notice. Evan felt a flicker of warmth at the comment. It's nothing. Everyone deserves a little help sometimes. The storm began to ease, raindrops softening to a gentle drizzle. Outside, the streetlights blinked back to life as the electricity returned. Liam looked around, hesitant to leave the warmth and light he'd found in Evan's living room. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity that made Evan pause. "Really? I don't know what I would have done if you weren't home." Evan smiled, an instinctive, private smile. "Anytime. That's what neighbors are for, right?" Liam lingered for a moment longer, and Evan felt the weight of unspoken words between them, feelings neither of them yet understood but both acknowledged in subtle, quiet ways. Then, finally, Liam turned and stepped toward the door, pulling his soaked jacket tighter around him. As Evan closed the door behind him, he leaned against it for a moment, staring at the dimly lit hallway. His heart was oddly restless, a mixture of curiosity and something deeper he couldn't name. The storm had passed, but a different kind of tension lingered, an unsettled, electric anticipation that made the quiet house feel far less empty than it had a few hours before. Evan returned to his laptop, but his focus wavered. He kept thinking about Liam, about the warmth in his voice, the way he carried himself in that storm, and about the strange pull of connection he hadn't felt in years. The night had started with a simple knock, but it left him questioning the boundaries of kindness, of loneliness, and of the human heart, and somewhere in the darkened streets outside, Liam walked home, feeling a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. The next few days unfolded in quiet repetition. Ethan returned to work, went through the motions, and came home to an empty house that still smelled faintly of rain. Liam was gone again, an out-of-town project, a hotel, a promise to make it up next weekend that would never be kept. Connor's house, however, was rarely dark now. Some nights, Ethan saw the faint flicker of a television through the curtains or the shifting shadow of movement. He told himself he wasn't watching, but he always noticed that it started innocently. A few days after that first visit, Connor knocked again, this time holding a plate of cookies. "Peace offering," he said with a grin. Didn't want to seem like the neighbor who only takes. Ethan smiled, unsure if it was politeness or anticipation that made him open the door. The smell of warm chocolate filled the kitchen as they sat at the table again, the same spot where the rain had once tapped against the window. "You bake?" Ethan asked surprisingly. "Yeah," Connor said. "Therapy, I guess. Gives my hands something to do." He shrugged, eyes glancing at Ethan's. "You ever need that? Something to distract you?" Ethan's laugh came out softer than intended. "Constantly." That became their rhythm, unplanned, but natural. Connor stopped by occasionally, sometimes to borrow something trivial, sometimes just to talk. Ethan didn't tell Liam. Not out of deceit, but because there was nothing, at least not yet, to tell. Still, each time Connor crossed his doorway, Ethan felt that invisible line between friendship and something else blur a little more. One evening, Connor invited him over. "Just dinner," he'd said. "No borrowing this time." Ethan hesitated but agreed. The house next door was still half unpacked, boxes stacked like reminders of transition. The meal was simple, pasta, wine, laughter that filled spaces neither of them knew were empty. "You cook better than you bake," Ethan said after the first bite. "I'll take that as a compliment," Connor replied. "You seem lighter tonight. Not as guarded." "Maybe it's the wine," Ethan said, though he knew it wasn't. There was a pause, a quiet, meaningful one. Connor leaned back, studying him. "You ever feel like you're waiting for something to start, but it never does?" Ethan met his gaze. "Every day." Connor smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then I guess we're both waiting." The air thickened, not with tension but awareness. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. The silence between them carried more weight than words could hold. After that night, Ethan's routines changed in subtle ways. He woke earlier, cared more about how his shirt fit, how his home smelled. He checked the window before bed, not to look outside, but to see if the light next door was still on. Days turned into weeks, and the small talks turned into deeper conversations. about choices, regrets, and the quiet ache of wanting something different. Liam called less. When he did, his voice was distant, distracted. Once, Ethan tried to tell him about Connor, about how strange it felt to finally have someone listen again. But Liam only said, "That's nice. I'm glad you have company," before hanging up to answer another call. That night, Ethan sat in the dark, phone still warm in his hand, when a knock came at the door. Connor stood there, hair damp from a walk in the drizzle, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said softly. Ethan didn't ask how he knew. He just stepped aside. They sat on the couch, the glow from a nearby lamp washing everything in amber light. Connor spoke about Seattle again, the noise, the people, the way love could feel like a performance. Ethan listened, then confessed quietly, "I used to think I knew what love was. But now it feels more like remembering a song I used to hum." Connor looked at him then, really looked, long enough that Ethan felt seen in a way he hadn't in years. No judgment, no pity. Just recognition. When Connor reached out, his hand stopped halfway, resting on the cushion between them. A gesture unfinished. "I don't want to complicate your life," Connor said. Ethan swallowed. "You already have." Neither spoke after that. The rain started again, soft and persistent. It filled the silence between heartbeats, a sound too gentle to carry guilt but too heavy to ignore. When Connor left that night, he didn't look back. But Ethan watched him go, the door closing like a quiet secret between them. Days passed, yet the pull didn't fade. It grew quieter, deeper, more difficult to explain. Ethan tried to distract himself, long drives, new hobbies, anything, but every road curved back to that same hollow feeling. Point. One afternoon, Liam called unexpectedly. "I'll be home tomorrow," he said. "We should talk." Ethan froze. The words sounded rehearsed, formal. Not angry, but cautious. When he hung up, he found himself at the window again, staring toward Connor's house. He thought of the laughter, the coffee, the unfinished gesture. Then he thought of Liam, the distance, the silence that had become their language. That evening, he saw Connor outside, trimming the hedge between their yards. Their eyes met across the low fence. Neither waved, but something passed between them, acknowledgement, understanding, restraint. "Hey," Connor said finally, setting down the shears. "You okay?" Ethan nodded. "Liam's coming back tomorrow." Connor hesitated. "That's good, right?" "It should be." Connor wiped his hands, stepping closer. "You don't have to explain anything." "I know," Ethan said. "That's the problem. You make me want to." Connor's breath caught, barely audible. He didn't reply. He just looked at Ethan as though memorizing something that wasn't his to keep. The sky darkened, and the wind picked up. Neither moved for a long time. Finally, Connor whispered, "Ethan, maybe it's better if—" "I know," Ethan interrupted. "I know." But neither finished the thought. The unspoken hung there, fragile and dangerous. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He lay awake listening to the wind rattle the windows, feeling the weight of what had grown between them. He hadn't crossed any physical line, but in the quiet honesty of his heart, he knew the truth. Something sacred had already been shared, something that could never be unnamed. Just before dawn, he rose and stood by the window. Connor's house was dark, peaceful. Yet Ethan could feel his presence, the echo of every conversation, every glance, every almost that he whispered to the glass, "It's already too much." But the words vanished into the dim light, unanswered, leaving only the hollow certainty that tomorrow, when Liam returned, nothing would be the same again. And still, despite the guilt, despite the knowledge of what was coming, Ethan didn't draw the curtains. He left them open, as if part of him hoped Connor might still be awake, thinking the same impossible thought. The first light of morning crept across the floor, pale and unforgiving. It found Ethan standing there, unmoving, waiting for a dawn he wasn't ready to face. Something had begun, and though it had no name, it already owned him. The week passed in a blur of routine for Evan, yet the undercurrent of tension with Liam remained. Each encounter, no matter how casual, carried a weight of unspoken understanding. On Wednesday evening, as the sun dipped behind the clouds and the neighborhood streetlights flickered to life, Evan's phone buzzed. It was Liam. Lights flickered again. "Could I come over?" Evan hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. He knew this was more than a casual visit, the invitation carried a subtle vulnerability he couldn't ignore. Yet, at the same time, he felt the pull, the quiet, insistent tug of curiosity and longing that had been growing since their first stormy night together. He typed back, "Of course. Come on over." When Liam arrived, soaked lightly from a passing shower, there was an easy familiarity between them that hadn't existed before. He carried nothing this time, just a quiet smile and the faint scent of rain on his jacket. "You always let me show up unannounced," Liam said, half joking, half serious. "I swear, it's not a habit I usually indulge." Evan gestured toward the couch, trying to maintain casualness while his mind raced. "Maybe you'll start a new habit," he replied lightly, though the underlying tension made his voice sound thinner than intended. They settled in, the room bathed in the soft golden glow of the floor lamp. Outside, the drizzle continued, a rhythm against the windows that echoed the quiet of the evening. Evan noticed Liam's hands resting on his knees, fingers tapping lightly, betraying his own anticipation. The connection between them, invisible but palpable, had grown into something neither could ignore. "You know," Liam said after a moment, voice soft, "I don't usually feel this comfortable around people. Not like this, anyway." His eyes met Evan's, earnest and searching, as though he were gauging whether Evan felt the same. Evan swallowed, heart tightening. "I know what you mean," he admitted. I've spent years in a life that feels comfortable, but quiet in the wrong ways. And you've reminded me of what it's like to feel noticed." The confession hung in the air, both intimate and dangerous. Evan felt a rush of guilt. Clara was coming home soon, and yet here he was, drawn to Liam in a way he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't physical, not yet, but the emotional pull was undeniable. For the next hour, they spoke quietly, honestly, of small things that revealed more than either intended. Liam shared the scars left by his last relationship, moments of betrayal and loss, and Evan, in turn, admitted his own feelings of distance within his marriage. Every word built a fragile bridge between them, taut with emotion and unspoken desire. "You ever think," Liam said softly, "that maybe we're drawn to people not because of what they are, but because of what they make us remember about ourselves?" Evan considered this. "All the time," he said. "And sometimes, it's terrifying." He realized he was trembling slightly, though he couldn't tell if it was from the lingering chill of rain or the intensity of the conversation. At one point, Liam leaned forward, brushing a strand of wet hair from his face, and their hands accidentally touched. Neither pulled away immediately. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility, and Evan's mind raced with the weight of choice, the temptation to step closer, or the wisdom to step back. That he chose the latter. "Some things," he said carefully, "are better left as what they could have been." Liam's lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but he nodded, understanding without argument. The tension didn't dissolve, it shifted, becoming a quiet acknowledgement of mutual restraint. It was a bittersweet resolution, a recognition that their connection was real, yet impossible to fully act upon without consequence. When the clock ticked past 10, Liam rose to leave, his movements measured, deliberate. "Thank you," he said, voice soft but steady. "For tonight. And for everything, really." Evan walked him to the door, both of them aware that this was more than a simple farewell. Outside, the street was wet and reflective, the streetlights shimmering in puddles. Liam paused at the edge of the porch, hesitating just long enough to make the moment feel suspended in time. "Take care," Evan said, quietly, almost as a warning to himself as to Liam. "You too," Liam replied. And then he turned and walked down the street, the faint echo of his footsteps mingling with the drizzle. Evan closed the door and leaned against it, a hollow ache in his chest. The quiet house suddenly felt too large, too empty. He walked to the living room window and watched as Liam disappeared into the night, swallowed by the soft shadows of the neighborhood. The lamp they had fixed together glowed warmly, a silent reminder of the intimacy they had shared without crossing the line. That night, Evan lay awake, replaying the moments in his mind with a clarity that both exhilarated and terrified him. He understood, with an almost painful precision, that the connection he felt with Liam had changed him. It wasn't about desire alone, it was about recognition, empathy, and the rare, fragile understanding that someone else could see the person he had hidden even from himself. The next morning, Clara returned home, cheerful and unaware, carrying the faint scent of her mother's garden with her. Evan met her at the door, smiling in the practiced way of a husband returning to normalcy, though his thoughts lingered elsewhere. He carried himself with the same calm exterior, but inside, a quiet storm of awareness and memory roared on. Over the next weeks, life resumed its familiar rhythm. Liam eventually moved a few streets away, and their interactions became fleeting and infrequent. But the memory of those evenings, the storms, the quiet conversations, the shared understanding, remained etched in Evan's mind. It was a lesson in connection, temptation, and the impermanence of fleeting intimacy. Evan sometimes caught himself glancing down the street where Liam had lived, the small flicker of a lamp in a window catching his attention. Each time, he remembered the weight of unspoken words, the tension of a bond acknowledged but unfulfilled. And he realized that some connections, no matter how brief, could leave a mark that time itself couldn't erase. In the end, Evan understood that life wasn't about crossing every line, nor was it about denying the stirrings of the heart. It was about recognizing them, learning from them, and carrying the memory forward, quietly, with gratitude, and with the awareness that some stories are meant to be experienced without ever reaching their final, inevitable conclusion.